Now, your job here is simply to set claim to an archaeological discovery of alien origin. The find was discovered a few meters below the surface of Titan by a geological research team from NTI.
Why didn't the team claim it?
Because the only survivor crashed into the Concorde on his return, and we can only assume that the rest of the team is dead.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
I did find I was looking for an Invisibles paperback that had a Tommy Lee Edwards art in it, allegedly, and I found a trade paperback called The Best of Dark Horse Presents Volume 3. I don't even know where I got that. That must have been from Schindler's. But I just, this evening, found it, was flipping through it, and there's a Steve Vance story in here.
Yeah, you got to be careful, because there's Steve Vance and there's James Vance. And the two guys did somewhat similar things, but not quite the same. So it's like, okay, which one am I talking about again? I need to make sure I got the right guy.
No, James Vance.
Yeah.
I'm wrong. So Stephen Vance is the guy we were talking about, or is in this aliens thing.
No, I think James Vance is the one. What we're talking about, one of the stories we're talking about is the James Vance story.
Okay. Kings in Disguise.
Yeah, James Vance.
Dark Horse Presents 42. Yeah, James. I didn't read it yet, but I found out it exists. It's in here with. I don't think I've ever read any of this, because there's like an Adam Hughes story. There's a Duckman comic.
Duckman, sure, yeah. I vaguely remember the cartoon. Jason Alexander, if I recall correctly, did the voice.
Yeah.
I know it came out of comics, but it was one of those deals where the animation was much more noted than the comic book was.
Right. This is from '93. I don't know where I must have got this. I don't know where I got this. There's Rick Geary in here. There's a Timothy Truman thing in here. There's a Concrete Story. Matt Wagner, the Aerialist. I don't know why there's a volume 3 over there, not a volume 1 or 2, but must have been cheap.
Exactly.
Cheap enough.
Yeah. Solicitation copy from the Dark Horse website reads, Alien Survival number 1 of 3. Thompson, a geological surveyor on a remote planet, has the perfect life. A loving wife, a son in Little League, even a pesky neighbor. The only problem is, Thompson's life may be all a dream. The reality may be that he's trapped underground in an escape pod with hours to live. And creatures with claws and acid blood are pounding on the door. Written by James Vance, drawn by Guy Davis, covered by Tony Harris, published February 11th, 1998. Also out from Dark Horse that month, the Aliens Harvest trade paperback, Aliens Kidnapped number 3, Dark Horse Presents Annual 1997 number 1, which featured an alien story, the trade collection for Predator Hell in Hot Water, as well as Hell Come a Walkin' number 1 and Nemesis number 2. Outside AVP, you had the Godzilla Age of Monsters trade, The Mask Martial Law number 1, which I believe was the last martial law comic book story, Dark Horse's relaunch of Sergio Aragonés Gru, and on the Star Wars front, the launch of Shadows of the Empire Evolution number 1. I guess we can now move into Alien Survival. This one is James Vance of Kings in Disguise, which was one of those interesting works where it won major industry awards. It was heralded as one of the 100 greatest comic books ever made in the time it came out. And I don't think anybody remembers Kings in Disguise anymore. I've not heard people talk about that on purpose in a very long time.
You know, that's the story that's in this Dark Horse Presents Best of trade paperback. It's one of them, a part of Kings in Disguise. That's what it's titled anyway. Kings in Disguise by James Vance and Dan Burr. So when I read that, I'll let you know how excited it made me see. But yeah, the covers to Survival, the Tony Harris covers, are the cover under the dust jacket on the omnibus.
This is the volume 3, right?
Yeah, here it's got the guy who it looks a lot like Tony Harris to me. It looks like it's like a self-portrait. The guy screaming, running away from aliens. That's the cover of number 2. But that's the way they set it up is that guy, like Tony Harris's face, if it is a self-portrait, is on the spine. So when I have this book on my shelf with the dust jacket off, it's Tony Harris's face that's sticking out. Then the aliens clawing for him are on the back, and the Marines trying to pull him out are on the front. It works. I mean, it's great as a triptych, but it's really, really cool on this big fat omnibus.
Yeah, it's a really gorgeous image. I don't know if Tony Harris ever did any long-form work on the aliens. I haven't gone looking yet, but not only is this a great cover, but really gorgeous coloring on this too. I don't know if the guy who did the interiors did the cover, because it's got a pretty distinctive look to it that is not reflected in the interiors. I suspect that maybe Harris did this himself, because it has that sort of painterly thought to it. It reminds me a little bit of Michael Golden, where it's such a unique color approach to the image that it feels like they would come from the artist himself. But really, really nice looking stuff.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really good. I love Tony Harris was actually, because I was going to say he did some White Wolf stuff, but Guy Davis did also. I don't know if maybe they know each other, but I think that's where, if not first, first heard of them. That's where I encountered their work pretty early. Both those guys. I don't know. I know James Vance. He did Dead Man, right? Did he do like that Dead Man, Dead Again, where it was or is that the different Vance? That the guy who did like where Dead Man went to all the big events? Like he was like at Supergirl's death, or maybe he was at Crisis, and then he was at
that miniseries from like what, the early 2000s or something.
Yeah, I think it was like
that's a dive there, man. I don't think that's him. I went to Wikipedia to see what they have to say. The main things they point out is Kings in Disguise, Mr. Hero the Pneumatic Man, which I remember that I read that series. You know, I have the choice between Kings in Disguise and Mr. Hero. I went with Mr. Hero, sadly. Alien Survival gets checked. Predator Homeworld gets checked. And he also co-wrote the serial of Omaha, the Cat Dancer, and Sizzle, in part because he was married to Kate Worley while she was still with us, while they were both still with us. They're both gone now. So I'm not seeing anything about Dead Man, so I'm thinking maybe it was Steve Vance. See if he's got a Wikipedia page. He does not. So that's one of those deals where there's only room for so many Vances in our industry, especially both of these guys are not necessarily the most well-known. You know, they're not necessarily the most topical of talents. I'm not the only person, and you are not the only person who's confused them. And it appears that it was Steve Vance who did Dead Man, but not necessarily the story you referenced, because he did the 2002 Dead Man series. No, there it is. He also did the Dead Again miniseries. So yeah, that's Steve Vance.
All right.
Yeah, and see, they both did Dark Horse work. They both worked on just a little bit on licensed properties. There's just a weird overlap here.
Yeah, it's like a Henry Flint.
Right. Well, no, the names screw you up. Trust me. You can one look at those guys, you can tell one from the other. I'm a huge Flint Henry fan. I have no use for Henry Flint. Sorry, my Brits people who like that dude, but yeah, I love Flint Henry.
Yeah, brain problem, but all right, I'll have this.
Well, see, the problem is I got very angry a number of times when I bought books that I thought were by one guy and were by another guy. I'm like, hey. The only reason I bought that was for name one, and the dyslexic part messed me up.
Yeah. But this one, I mean, I like this one too. I think it's not perfect, because this is a story where it's one of these back and forth between what's reality and what's like a hallucination.
Well, and we talked about that Borderlands story where the delineation is fairly clear from one to the other, where this one is intentionally more vague, because the whole point is that the lead character, our narrator, is suffering a 104-degree temperature that's cooking his brain, and he doesn't know what's real and what's illusion, so the reader isn't necessarily supposed to either. As Aliens comics go, it's fairly artsy-fartsy in that way.
And I'm trying to think, like, if there was a visual cue, would that help it or hurt it? Like, I think ultimately it's pretty effective, and it kind of keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the disorientation is the intent, so I can't fault them for doing the thing that they were trying to do.
It's just that it gets so weird that it's almost like I ended up discounting the stuff that was happening. Like, well, this can't possibly be what's really happening. This isn't really real. This part's not really real.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. They pull a Nightmare on Elm Street kind of thing on us, where you have a dream inside of a dream. So you have multiple false wake-ups at the very beginning of the story. So they're playing fair with you to the extent that by the end of the first issue, you know that you really can't take any of this for granted.
Right. Yeah. And I think it works better how it is, but I find myself wondering. And they do use the coloring. Like there's the one sequence where it's fully in black and white, and then but even when there's flashbacks with his kid, it's almost like a softer.
Yeah, it's very pastel and very muted. Yeah, and then as the angry neighbor morphs into an alien, it becomes much more bold, heavy red saturation. So there's cues.
Yeah. I think it's a really effective story. It's the opposite of what a lot of the other ones I've read, in that, again, there's not a female lead. They're not in space. Like, it ends up when he has a hallucination, he shoots the windows out of his escape pod. The windows fill up with dirt, and he realizes he's trapped underground. So it's, they expect him to zig, and then they zag. It's one guy by himself. He's not with his, science team anymore. He's not in space. He's underground. And I think the reason that I found it effective is that it kind of plays into the male expectations about reproduction. Like, it talks about his relationship with his kid, and then, one of the hallucinations makes a comment like it's not, you weren't that great of a dad, or you're sugarcoating this, you're idealizing this relationship that's over now because your kid is dead.
Well, I mean, this is the kind of story that this was before they used terminology like toxic masculinity, and you could argue that that's addressed in the story, but since it's a fella who's sick and he's attacking himself with recriminations about how he handled the aliens and how well or how poorly he protected his family from the aliens, is it that there's other people criticizing him, or is it more likely that he's criticizing himself as having failed these people and criticizing his own role as a father? It's again, the artsy fartsy. It's like it's not as like, I know there's a lot of talk right now. There's a movie out where they make a story that's supposed to be about misanthropy, about toxic masculinity explicitly and exclusively, and I think that this is more like that vagueness where that's an element, but there's a lot more going on here. There's a lot more criticism, broadly speaking, of the social contract and the expectations of a man, of his own abilities and his role as a father and as a member of a family, as a member of a company, as a member of society even. So it's a complex story. You can't really boil it down to any one thing where it's like, oh, this is the story about X. It's like there's a lot of room for interpretation here as far as what the point of all of this is. And part of it is that, again, this is an unreliable narrator going through a traumatic circumstance, pretty violent intrusion on his own body as well. And so none of this can be entirely trusted. It's a little bit Lynchian in that way, where you can bring some of your own stuff to the story, but you can also take it more literally and see this as a guy who's just experiencing tumult based on trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it didn't escape me either that as far as the plot wise, not necessarily the theme wise, but what the plot of the story is, that they're ultimately trying to vaccinate against xenomorphs, which I feel like must have been covered before, but I couldn't think of it. I don't know if that's like a new concept here, like they're trying to inoculate you against xenomorph impregnation. I thought that was kind of compelling. But
well, and it's funny too, you are talking about the novel elements in the story, but also in the past you've talked about your expectations for an alien story and what defines it. Is it the colonial marines? Is it the corporate malfeasance? Is it the pulse cannons? Is it the ship designs? What elements have to be there for it to be a proper alien story, for it to meet the criteria? And as many novel elements as there are here, and as much as the story is really about this person processing trauma, you still kind of check a lot of those boxes too. So you get both. You get the familiar and you get the novel.
Yeah.
Alien Survival #1 was the 141st ranked comic in unit sales for February 1998, selling 15,744 copies, which means it did better than Predator: Hell Come A-Walking at 146th place and about 700 fewer copies, which was immediately followed by Aliens Kidnapped #3, about another 400 copies down from Predator. The top selling Dark Horse comics for the month were Star Wars Crimson Empire #3 in 55th place, Shadows of the Empire Evolution #1 in 57th, Star Wars The Last Command #3 in 61st, X-Wing Rogue Squadron Family Ties #2 at 80th, Martha Washington Saves the World #3 in 120th, Gru #2 in 127th, and then Alien Survival in 7th place. Solicitation copy for Alien Survival #2 reads, while trying to cope with a mysterious epidemic, the scientific expedition is nearly wiped out by a series of horrific encounters with the aliens, and Thompson tries to keep a grip on his sanity in an underground sanctuary. The website lists the book shipping as March 11th. Nobody agrees with that. Mike's Amazing World of Comics lists counter date of March 18th for a house ad in Tarzan #20, Usenet Comic List, Comic Buyer's Guide #1270. Elsewhere in comics, the Batman titles were experiencing a cataclysm. J. Scott Campbell's Danger Girl launched from Wildstorm's Homage imprint. Daredevil hit 375 with Joe Kelly and Carrie Nord. Spider-Man was going through an identity crisis where he pretended to be like 4 different other superhero characters who eventually spun off into being their own characters before I think they got killed off or something, nobody cared. And Topps' Xena Warrior Princess launched a new miniseries where she fought Callisto.
I think the art, it goes a long way to reinforce the it's not really like a gory horror. It's more just like a undercurrent of unease horror in this whole thing, even though they do some pretty outrageous there's some pretty outrageous hallucinations in here. But I think I don't want to say it's understated, but it's more, and it's not even necessarily more sophisticated. It's just like a different tone. Guy Davis does some really subtle body horror stuff. It is more like a Lynch or a Cronenberg than it is like James Cameron alien story, or even like a Ridley Scott alien story. It's very, one of the hallucinations, his wife is there with a new son a new perfect son, and it's the alien fetus thing, which is reminded me of like something like The Brood, Cronenberg, kind of like, ugh. It's not like a shocking or appalling. It's just kind of like, unease type thing. It's not particularly graphic either. It's more like a objective, matter of fact documentary style, almost like. And for something like a hallucination, I think that's where the magic happens in this story. It's something that's so surreal, presented so matter of fact that it doesn't shock you, but it stays with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, you send me some photographs from the Modern Masters edition of Guy Davis, where he's talking about having access to these licensed properties after being pigeonholed as being the mid-century guy or the Depression era guy. But at the same time, what works about the story is the combination of writer and artist, that James Vance is approaching the story with a somewhat more high-minded place than just the shock, suspense, action, horror, whatever. The Guy Davis brings a domesticity. This is at its core story about a man, a father, or a human being who's processing trauma, and he's not, while the aliens are a recurrent element of the story, it's really about him dealing with the loss of his wife and his relationship with her, loss of the son, their relationship, idealized version of himself and the son versus the reality and the disparity between the two, but also with the expectation that he's going to be pretty hard on himself considering that they both recently passed and were supposed to be under his care. I lean toward the Lynch quality because Cronenberg is a guy, as you say, known for the body horror. He's also a person who lingers and who's known for those visuals that repulse disgust, where Lynch is better known for that unreliability. What's real, what's illusion, what's in a person's mind. This is a story about this guy like constantly losing the thread and having to retrace his steps. You're telling a story of what really happened, but you're constantly getting sidetracked by these diversions of where he thinks he was at, what he thought he did, and what he actually does. And that back and forth does remind me more of like a Lynch thing. And I think it's helped by the Guy Davis artwork, because another thing that Lynch is known for is the whole wrought behind the white picket fences, the suburban, clean, healthy, frigid air quality of 1950s Americana. And then you've got the molestation and the murder and the horror behind that facade. And you have a little bit of that too, except that while you already know early on that the family's dead, you know early on that he's in a bad situation, he's sick, so he's probably doomed. And this is the kind of story where you don't feel like it's going to have a happy ending. So having an artist that makes it feel more of the reality of the situation, that there's a guy and he's pudgy and he's got glasses, he's not the hero, he's not the gun-toting badass. Guy Davis helps to sell that. So Guy Davis doing one of the more fantastic stories wouldn't have worked. He's outside of his normal wheelhouse in the story, but he's bringing his strengths to the story, and it's meeting the script writer where he's at to tell an alien story from a different place than we would normally expect, and to play to his strengths where not necessarily depicting aliens or body horror or gore would have been his strength. It's about the human element within the story. That's what he captures well.
Right. Although he does do some the figures are really, really strong and really dynamic in this.
Yeah. They're
there's
fluid.
a page where, they're very fluid.
But there's also
they're
an abstraction. They're almost at no point is he drawing, some of these guys want to go in there and they want to draw every little tooth and chrome it out and make sure you've got the skull underneath the carapace and all this kind of stuff. Whereas if you look at his stuff, it's very art school, very sketchbook. It's the impression of an alien more than it is the actual rendition of the alien. It's a bunch of oblong shapes that your mind interprets to be the Giger's xenomorph, but that's not necessarily what he's rendering to such a degree that you would know that if you didn't know that. You have enough, especially as a fan of this material, you have enough a sense of what an alien is supposed to be, that this rectangle and this oval, you can interpret what that is supposed to be, but it's not rendered exactly, and it's again to the benefit of the story because you're not really supposed to be paying attention to the aliens. The aliens are sort of incidental to the tale of what this guy is going through and what he's having to process.
Yeah. But it's really good. And I was trying to figure out how would this story have been different, or would it have been effective if it was somebody else doing it? Because there's some real crazy stuff that happening with these hallucinations, and I'm like, does that make more sense if it's somebody like a? Yeah,
I think he really is the right guy for this project. I
think he's perfect.
There is not a lot of hard lines here. This is very scratchy, and that's something he's good at because it makes it feel insubstantial. It makes it feel like your hold on reality from panel to panel is not strong. You need that for this type of story. So I think that sketchiness, and also I think you need your eye needs to keep moving. I think that if you get somebody who's going to go in there and like do all this really fine rendering and make you stop and look at it, I think that's to the detriment of the story. You got to keep going, and then you're like, wait, what's happening? And wait, where we diverge because we're not in reality anymore, and then we're back again. He is the guy you need for this type of story. I think if they go, like, again, I'm admiring the Tony Harris covers. He would not have been the guy to draw the interiors for this, though. It's a really good fit of story and art.
Right. Yeah. Because I think if you had somebody who was more psychedelic, it wouldn't work because the domestic mundane scenes wouldn't sell. And if you had somebody who was like leaning more into like a horror, like if Kelly Jones drew it, it wouldn't be as effective, right? Like you might have like cooler aliens drawings or gorier aliens drawings, but it wouldn't. That's not the point of this. Almost, you know what I mean?
This is a Chief Brody situation. We need, this is a guy who's a small town sheriff, and all of a sudden there's a shark eating people that he's been around his entire life, or been around. They spent their entire lives with this guy, and now they're getting ate by sharks. You know, you can't have Tony Scott direct that movie. You need the right cast, the right director. In this case, we've got the right people here. If you have Kelly Jones, it's not necessarily Kelly Jones couldn't do that loose reality as well. He's done that sort of thing before, but it's going to change the nature of the story, and I don't think it serves the story that James Vance is telling. Like, I think that another writer and another artist paired off could do a similar story and have it work, but the specific script we're working from here, you need an artist just like the artist that we have doing the story. It doesn't work otherwise. It's these guys fit together. Yeah, I agree. I love Kelly Jones. Yeah. It's a side note. He's great. But the top Dark Horse comics for the month of March 1998 begins at 56th place with Star Wars Crimson Empire number 4, selling 38,159 copies, followed by Star Wars The Last Command number 4, Shadows of the Empire Evolution number 2, those were at 71 and 72, X-Wing Rogue Squadron Masquerade number 1 at 86, Gru number 3 at 140th, Abe Sapien Drums of the Dead at 147, Alien Survival number 2 again in 7th place against the other Dark Horse titles, 161st place overall, selling 14,321 copies, besting Predator Hell Come a Walkin' number 2 in 164th, Ghost number 35 in 165th, Oh My Goddess, Miss Kelchi number 1 in 166th, Paul Chadwick's Concrete Strange Armor number 4 in 169th, Gunsmith Cat's Goldie vs. Misty number 5 in 170th place, and Magic the Gathering Initiation number 1 in 176th place. Solicitation copy for Alien Survival number 3 reads, Surveyor Thompson was sure he had destroyed the aliens, but when the vile creatures start sprouting human chest bursters, he gets the distinct feeling that he's hallucinating again. Trapped in an underground escape pod, he recollects his crew's fatal meeting with the aliens and finally deduces the company's plot against them. But just because Thompson's trapped doesn't mean he's helpless. He's devised a plan to avenge his colleagues and implicate the company, even if it costs him his life. Shipping April 29th, 1998. That date appears to be sound. Notable titles of the month include The Aftershock in the Batman titles, the Wildstorm Cliffhanger Lines Battle Chasers number 1. It occurs to me that Danger Girl is probably also a Cliffhanger title. I've got it confused with Homage. Wolverine reached 125, written by Chris Claremont, drawn by Neil Francis Yu. DC Comic offered the 5th week event Girl Frenzy series of specials. I think this is the month where they cut it out with the Superman Red, Superman Blue stuff. They have the special Superman Forever with a lenticular animation, Alex Ross series of paintings.
I think the other thing that stands out in this, and I think it kind of goes back to that toxic masculinity thing, is when he's having the fantasy about the humans breaking out of the aliens, and he says, let's see how you like it, type of thing. And he has this kind of like, almost like this childish reaction, and that's not the reaction of somebody who's confident or going to win, right? You know, that's like you're posturing at best and flailing at worst if you're having like this, almost like a you're not the boss of me type of reaction, right? So he knows his goose is cooked when, and he, even though he's quote unquote winning in his hallucination there. But I think that kind of goes back to the whole, these things are emasculating him. They're taking away his family. They're showing him, making him feel that he failed his family, and making him reflect negatively on his role as a father and even at his job. I think that it all comes together. It really comes together pretty well. I think if it was 4 issues, that might have been a little bit much, and I don't think it could have worked with 2 issues. I think it was good. I think it was the right length. It's pretty compelling. I read it a couple times. It's not my number 1 favorite Alien story, but it's pretty good.
It's a thing that kind of gets to me. The length of the book should be the length you need to tell a story, right? And Dark Horse, when they started doing these miniseries, they were very strict, 4 issues. And at some point after the bust, it goes from 4 issues to 3 issues. And my feeling is that what happened is that they were having attrition, and the first 3 issues were profitable, and the 4th fourth issue was costing them money, and that's why it went from a 4-issue to a 3-issue. So it's not that it's necessarily in service to the story, it's in service to the profit motive, that we can make a profit off 3 issues. When we go for that fourth, we lose too many of our readers by the 4th issue. But I also think that what happens is you've got people reading the first issue, realizing they're not really that into it and not wanting to finish the miniseries, and that's why you have the sales start to tank by the 4th issue, and that's why they turn them all into 3-issue miniseries. You already struggled to make 6-issue stories fit in a 4-issue format, and sometimes they would be a little bit more rushed or a little bit more substantial, or more insubstantial, because people are writing for the 4 issues, and now they're writing for the 3 issues. And the more they do that, the more it feels like these are short story, serialized stories for Dark Horse Presents that became miniseries. This is a decent example, but it's also, most of what we saw in the story could have been cut down to a single issue, I think. I think you could have done this as a short serial in Dark Horse Presents without having it be a 3-issue miniseries. I do think there's some stuff where they just sort of like, we've got the space, let's go ahead and take advantage, let's do another divergence, let's do another false narrative before we go back to the main narrative again. And so there is that sense that I'm having with these stories where they're just kind of overlong anthology stories. They're not really needing to be miniseries. They do a decent job of expanding them to miniseries length, but I don't really necessarily feel there's enough meat on the bones to where it was necessary to run 4 issues, 3 issues, what have you. I just feel like a lot of the times it runs that long because that's the rope that they gave them to run with. And that's one of the problems I'm having with these Alien stories on the back end as we get toward the end of the 90s. There was a time where it felt like they were trying to build a greater, broader narrative, particularly with the Verheiden stuff, where you had each miniseries build on the last one. Well, we'll do some more stuff with Xenozip, and we'll do some more stuff with the Grant Corporation, and like still trying to make it a part of a grander scale story. And the scope has gotten so narrow now, they could have taken Borderlands and expanded it to a 3-issue miniseries. They could have taken this and shrunk it down to an 8-page story. It's just them fitting the format. You can have good stories, you can have bad stories, but there is an element of the disposable. It is a sort of anthology thing where this is the Alien story that we're running for this 3-month period, and the next month somebody else is going to do another story, and none of it really matters because none of it's really building to anything. I understand like the desire to want to read something in isolation. I like anthology books for that reason, where you can just read a single story, serving story, and not have to worry about it being part of this greater whole. But the problem is when you've got a series of stories that are all about the same alien type, the same corporations, often with the same sort of twists, it just gets so repetitive after a while. It's part of why I'm struggling with the show at this point, because some variation of the story I've already read a half dozen times. This is a pretty good version of the story, but it's not so new. The elements are different, but the core of it is the same as so many other stories that I've already read that it's a little fatiguing. One thing that I do find interesting with this story is that it all comes down to it being another corporate plot where it's like we're going to expend our human capital as part of our R&D to see if we can find a vaccine for aliens, something that'll prevent aliens from attacking people, and they find it. And because this guy's lost his family and all of his coworkers and all these people were sacrificed to find this vaccine, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to stick it to the company. I'm going to show them, even though I've got the successful vaccine, I'm going to kill myself. They're never going to know it. And I'm going to strike a blow to Weyland-Yutani or whatever corporation is behind this stuff. And that's the story ends with, oh, okay, well, this one didn't work. So we're going to kill a whole bunch of other people and continuing to look for this thing that they'd already found, that they know they'd found, if this guy hadn't decided to punk them, if this guy hadn't decided that he was going to get his revenge on them by not letting them have a vaccine. But if there were a vaccine out there, you wouldn't have so many people dying because they would be vaccinated. It almost takes an anti-vaxxer story, turns it into a vaxxer story. But because you have to have that ironic twist, it's like, oops, I guess we don't get to have it after all because you're a bad corporation and you came to this through bad means. It's just a steady cynicism that's a constant in the Alien stories where it's like, okay, this is a novel twist, but it's still the same expected EC. Uh-oh, looks like, things didn't work out the way you thought they were gonna. It'd be nice to have one of these things surprise me, but it doesn't surprise me. The twist was different, but the tone and the expectation of where we're going to be at the end of the story is exactly the same as every other Alien story, it seems like. So it's a struggle because I think that they did a nice job with this one, but I'm still not like, wow, I can't read the next Alien story because it's going to be something very similar to this one probably, yet again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what you're saying about the anthology vibe, right? Is that there's no through line to the next one. Like, these people are all dead, this vaccine thing didn't take off, and then the next thing is going to be God knows what. Total do-over.
Next time they'll do the thing where they've got the gel packs wax all over them that negates the alien acid, and then they'll do a backsplash, and oops, there's too much acid, it's going to beat through the bags, and it's always going to be the dark, cynical, oh, things didn't work out after all kind of thing.
Yeah, and this one I did like how it kind of explored the toxic masculinity, because there was masculinity in it before, but it's like the Hondo Pest, almost like funny masculinity. That guy just running around like he's Lobo or whatever. But this seemed more.
Well, I mean, this is definitely a more mature, more sophisticated story. Like this is, if you're going to do this kind of thing, this is a good example of doing this kind of thing. It's just the thing that I'm expecting. It's like prescribed. It's like, okay, this is my GERD medication. If I take this, then I'm not going to have acid reflux. But I'm not excited to take the GERD medication. There's no thrill to taking the medication that day. It's just, okay, this is what I can expect from this thing that's been prescribed to me. So do you have a page in survival?
Yeah, let me see. I think I like just, it's one of the pages where the aliens are just, well, maybe that last page actually, just for the last page, or if I was going to get a page with aliens on, I think I'd want one where it's just them loose jumping around. Oh, you know what is even better? I think the better one is where they are, because there's two sequences where they raid the alien hive at the end. I'd take the one where they are successfully raiding the hive in his hallucination, I think, where they sneak up on the drone and then machine gun blows it up, and he's leading the charge and protecting his son and all that stuff. It's kind of a cool page. I would take that delusion page.
Yeah, you referenced the Modern Masters. I remember when those were first starting to come out, I liked some of the books that Two Morals were putting out, like Back Issue and Comic Book Artist. Well, eventually I turned it into Comic Book Creator, if I remember correctly, because they wanted it to be more discipline neutral.
Yeah.
I never grabbed the Modern Masters in part because they were kind of pricey at a time where I didn't really have a lot of cash, so I only bought a few of them. And I've gone back and I've bought a lot of that stuff in the years since, but I've never committed to Modern Masters because there are just some artists that I don't feel strongly enough about to own a whole book of interviews and artwork from them. And while I've been complimentary of Guy Davis, I respect his work, I think he's a good storyteller, but I don't have enough interest in him to have a page of his, to have a Modern Masters for him. So I'd pretty much, give me a cover, give me a front piece, give me something else. It's not really my bag. That's one of those where it's if the choice between having a page and not having a page, I think I'm good.
Oh, I think his mystery theater stuff is
he's a great fit for that material, and I've enjoyed his storytelling. I think he's good at what he does. I'm just not passionate about it. It's one of those deals where it's like there's some artists that I actively dislike, and even if they're doing something that I would normally want to pick up, I'm like, no, I'm not going to buy that. I don't like that guy. I don't feel that way about Guy Davis, but it's like even doing the aliens, it's like I don't need an alien page. He can do the story. He did a good job of the story. I don't need a page though.
Oh, he did his Modern Masters has got it looks like must have been like a deluxe convention sketch, but it's a Rom the Space thing.
Oh, okay. That could be cool.
It's pretty great. He does like a Dick Tracy in here in the back. I think she's pretty great. He was doing The Realm. It was almost like an anime style, and then he pivots really hard on Baker Street, and it ends up being kind of like it is now. And his later, like his stuff, like this Modern Masters is like 10 years old, I think. His modern stuff is veering toward a little bit cartoonier again. It's really wild. I think he's great. I've got an original Sandman, not a page, but like Wes and Ian together. I'll send you a picture of it. I don't have it framed yet, but I've got it. Yeah, he's pretty great. Like his monsters. I like this when the guy who draws something and you have to do a double take on like what even is this? Like this kind of like Lovecraftian, asymmetrical, just gonzo monsters. I think that's pretty great. Yeah, he's really solid. And he's just a clear storyteller. I like how he had references in this book a couple times, like he did layouts for somebody else. And like I can totally see that. Like he's the guy you would say, at least just break down this page for somebody and let them finish it.
Top books for March 1998 at Dark Horse included Star Wars Crimson Empire number 5 and 50th, with sales of 41,203 copies. Star Wars The Last Command number 5 and 66th. Shadows of the Empire Revolution number 3 and 67th. X-Wing Rogue Squadron in 86th. The Dark Horse adaptation of the Lost in Space motion picture starring Matt LeBlanc was right in the top 100, 83rd in dollars, selling 24,144 copies. Grew in 129th. Alien Survival at 150th, still the number 7 Dark Horse title consistently, 140th in dollars, selling 14,262 copies, beating out Predator Captive at 151st place, Ghost at 153rd, Gunsmith Cats at 154th. That's the top 10.
And then maybe that's what they're trying to get away from because isn't that what that Xenogenesis is supposed to be about? It was supposed to be like a relaunch.
Yeah, well, I'm going to cross that bridge when I get to it. I vaguely remember those comics coming out when when I was a retailer. I have no recollection. I might have even read one or two of them, but I have no recollection of what they were trying to do with that. I just know that it was a big thing where they were going the opposite way, where it's like, I think they were trying to do let's do an Aliens Predator universe. And people didn't respond well, but I guess we'll see how that goes when we come to that one,
Trying to look at the credits. I think
So that was like Ian Edgington did at least one or two of those series, because I've got that interview that he did with AVP Universe, and I'm looking for material because he wrote quite a bit of Dark Horse licensed stuff in the day. So I've had to parse that out for his work on Aliens Batman, on one of the Terminator miniseries, and then of course they talk at length about Xenogenesis. So I made sure to save those recordings for the future, but without divorced from context, I only have their thoughts on it in that time period. I don't have any opinion of my own, not having read that material or not read enough of it recently enough to have an opinion on it.
It looks like, so do you know Philip Amara? Did that guy write? He wrote Nevermen with Guy Davis, right? Or Guy Davis, maybe?
I'm going to have to trust your...
That guy?
Yeah, I'll trust your assertion on that. He's the editor of this miniseries.
Yeah, and he's the editor. He is not the editor of Mondo Heat. He co-edits Lovesick, does not work on Pig, and then he is co-editor until Alchemy, and then he takes over.
Well, not for terribly long, because the Survival ends in April 98, and the Aliens Predator material stops in 99 for the most part, aside from crossovers. I don't think they ever had like Aliens group editor, at least not in this time period. It wasn't like a Superman triangle number kind of situation. You'd have this guy edit this miniseries and that guy edit this special, which again lends itself to that modular quality where it's like, okay, we're going to plug this guy's miniseries into this slot and we're going to plug this thing over to that slot, and they don't contradict each other, so yeah.
Well, he was probably, 97 to 99. That's a halfway decent fun. But it looks like he's doing this, if he's doing Havoc, Alchemy, Kidnapped, he's Survival, he's doing more maybe like quasi-Vertigo kind of stuff. Is that what he's thinking? But then he pivots into the Mark Schultz stuff, is a stab at like a continuity thing. And then Xenogenesis is it's a different take, but I think it was the same idea where like they're going to try and do like superhero style Aliens comics. And it ends. And it's like, no, we're not doing this anymore until 2009. It skips from November 1999, which is Xenogenesis number 4, to May 2009 for Free Comic Book Day.
Yeah, that amused me because you sent me that photo from the table of contents, and I noticed that huge jump. And of course, I'm aware because I've plotted out some of that material. There's a whole period there where it's nothing but Aliens versus Predator stuff, and Aliens versus stuff, and Predator versus stuff. So it's not like they didn't do stuff with the license, but in terms of like the ongoing miniseries, solo stuff, and I don't know why that would be. I don't know why you would just license the material for crossovers, but that's all they were interested in for quite a few years there, of value added to Aliens properties as opposed to relying on the actual property itself.
Yeah, maybe that's part of it too. Maybe they just hit the wall.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, this only makes sense if we can throw them up against Superman or Green Lantern or Vampirella or whatever the
Right,
heck.
all of the above.
All this and more. I'll try to find those Vampirella ones. The hard copies are not easy to find.
Yeah, well, and Marvel's not going to be in a hurry to share revenue if they don't have to. So I'm sure they'll at some point do the crossovers collection or something, but it might be pretty narrow focused too. It might be one of those things where they try to put together all the ones from one particular company or something. So they don't just, the legal headaches of trying to intermingle would probably be more than it's worth. And some of the stuff probably just doesn't get reprinted because it's not worth the hassle.
Yeah, I mean, I guarantee, well, I don't guarantee. I would be shocked and amazed if they did any of the DC stuff, or especially like Wildcats. Where are you going to find that?
Well, the good thing with Wildcats is since DC owns it, and they have last I checked, they still had a good relationship with Dark Horse. They actually collect that in those the DC Dark Horse crossovers ones, where they were throwing, I think Batman Grindel and all kinds of stuff would get just thrown together into that thing. And so at one point they did have the Batman, so because they did those collections before Marvel bought, or rather before Disney bought Fox. Now that Disney owns Fox and therefore the Aliens properties, I don't think you're going to see that anytime soon. But before that happened, when they were still Fox properties, DC did another collection where they had that in the mix, and so that's probably going to be your last best chance to get that in sort of nice bundle, in a quality presentation.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. I would like to see some of that stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
Did you want to monologue on Romulus?
Oh man, I mean, I'm just very, very excited that there's if you're breaking down the movies, it used to be there's 2 great ones, there's 2 okay ones, and there's 2 not okay ones. And now there's 3 good ones. The tide is turned. I think if they do, I don't know I would hope. I don't even know what to hope for more Aliens movies. But this one was so good. I was so happy to see a good Alien movie in the theater. They don't even have to make another one. And I'm so happy. It was scary. It was gross. It was, in a lot of ways, it was kind of offensive, but in a good way. That makes sense. I remember talking to my friend about it. Like, if they had that ending in a movie in the 90s, can you imagine like the Million Moms protest or whatever that they would have had? It would have just been outraged. People have been boycotting and screaming and hollering. But I think it wasn't like it went right up to the line of what is acceptable within the admittedly horrific parameters of an alien context, right? Like the whole thing about like forced birth and all this impregnation stuff. To have they write off the pregnant character as dead, right? They're like, oh well, she's gone. Like, oh no, she's not dead. She's gonna make it. Like, oh, of course she's gonna make it. They're not gonna kill the pregnant teenager, right? And then the whole climax. And I was just so happy to see the good alien movie. I didn't know where it was going. Everything I was predicting about it in my head was wrong. I thought the elevator scene was the climax of the whole thing, and so I was like, well, this must be where the movie's over, right? And then that whole rest of it happened. I was just delighted. I went and saw it twice. I couldn't stand it. It was so entertaining and so happy to see a good scary alien movie. And I didn't even mind. I didn't even. And then that guy at the end is real. Did you see that? Those YouTube videos about that guy, the actor?
Oh,
who plays
right. Yeah. Yep.
I thought. I had no idea, and that was perfect for me, because the whole thing about like the android, I'm like, this android, it looks like he's a puppet half the time, and then he is a puppet. Like, is he a puppet? Like, this guy, that looks like a real dude. Like, that can't be a real dude. I mean, and real dude. I'm like, I don't know how you went and got a guy that looks like he's a real life engineer to dress up like a alien. I don't know. I don't know how they did it. I'm just glad they did. So energized to go and be able to see a good alien movie in the theater, which I have not done in my life, seen a good alien movie in the theater. It was great. I was very happy. I was very pleased. And like I said, I don't even know what to expect now, because I never thought I'd be here. Like, now, do I want another good alien movie in the theater? Do I want 10? Is 1 enough? I don't know. Just happy we got what we got.
Well, I think the next step is still the
Very
Noah
excited.
Hawley series, the TV series for FX.
Oh, I keep forgetting.
Yeah, and I think that's next year, isn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do keep forgetting it exists. I don't know if what do you think about that?
Well, and they haven't talked about anything cinematically yet, but Romulus made money, so they're talking about it assuredly behind the scenes.
I don't know. But do you think Aliens is that a TV show?
I'm going to find out. I'm looking forward to checking it out. I think there's potential there. I think that what I want to see for the future of the Aliens franchise will probably come from television. I'm hopeful of that. I don't feel like what I want to see going forward is going to come from the movies. So I'm hopeful that we're going to get more of an exploration of the themes in television. I think by necessity, you're going to have a greater depth of exploration there.
Do you think they'll do it though? Do you know what I mean? Or are they going to just focus on like the ships and the aliens and the logistics?
Well, I mean, the show's now called Aliens Earth or Alien Earth, so that kind of tells you the direction right there.
Shit. All right.
Yeah, and he talked about it recently that there's something really special about seeing aliens in terrestrial environments, and there's one scene in particular that he's looking forward to people watching and then having to leave the lights on that night. So he's pretty enthused about it.
Oh, all right.
Now, of course, that's talk. Until they actually produces it, we won't know. But they've cast it, they've written it. I don't think they're filming it yet, but I think it's due for next year. So it's not just like a theoretical thing. It's a thing that seems to be happening.
But is it going to be like a Hulu thing?
Yeah, it's either Hulu or FX.
Or FX?
Yeah, like recently they pivoted Green Lantern from Max to HBO, but obviously FX isn't HBO. But I think there is a stronger consideration of the TV component, maybe to shore up cable before that's completely a dead thing. So I think it's going to be an FX thing, but it might be a Hulu Hulu. I'm not sure.
I think most of that stuff ends up there.
Oh, it'll get
Right?
there eventually. It's just it might be one of those situations where it's on FX on a Wednesday and Hulu either the weekend or the following week or something. I just think that there seems to be a pivot toward emphasizing terrestrial versus time-shifted materials. I'm not sure what the plan is for that. I just know that there was an association with FX initially. I want to say that they're emphasizing the terrestrial element first, ironically or appropriately, depending how you look at it.
Well, I think the way I coped with Romulus is I tried to stay away from it as much as I could until I glimpsed a couple. I think I got like a soundbite or part of an interview, and I'm like, oh, that sounds good, and then I cut it off, and I didn't. I just wanted to go at it cold, so I'll probably do that with this TV show too. Try to stay away from it, and then cross my fingers before I dive in. Yeah, it was fun because I took my son when we saw it first time, and he said it wasn't the scariest movie he's ever seen, but it's the scariest movie he's ever seen in a theater. So I thought that was cool. That's a good review from an 18-year-old. Though I think that his scariest movie he ever saw was still the John Carpenter's Thing.
I mean, that's pretty good company to be in.
Probably, yeah. I think it was when that Among Us game was first out, and people were making references to the Thing, and he wanted to see it. And you're probably old enough to see it. I don't watch a lot of horror movies with you. Let's watch this movie. I think it potentially left a lasting impression, but maybe not in a bad way. It's a good movie.
Anna Adams, Bella Robinson, Billet Spy Vinyl, Billy Hines, Comics Enabler, who added, good episode. I recommend the What Went Wrong episode about The Thing. Mostly focuses on the Carpenter one, but a chunk at the end about the prequel and the effects therein. Chris Dunford, The Comic Crush, Dave's Comic Heroes blog. DC Dave, The Dead End Kid wrote, oh, I've been waiting for this. Del Dracula, Derek W.C., Dr. Ange, Dirk Ashton has finished KRZ 2, Thunderkraken, Ed Mort Teal Productions, Frank Pepe, Gas 55555, Gregory Litchfield, Hal Colbeck, History of Comics on Film, Jared Keane, JMT Productions, Julie Raoul, Keith G. Baker, King Dinosaur, Lamar the Revenger, Leo, M.H. Blake, Mike may have eaten all the caramel apples in his area, Moody Machan, presidential candidate Kirk Spencer, Ray Rod 52, Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, Sam Lowe, Sam the Excitement, Stop, Let's Team Up, A Comic Podcast, Superbound, and William Voyage.
This has been the Rolled Spine Podcast. All audio samples are believed covered under fair use laws. No copyright infringement is intended.